Hi, thank you for joining us at the WAVY Digital Desk. We have Dr. Richmond here, and he is going to go over some post-election analysis and results with us. So, Dr. Richmond, thanks so much for joining us today. I know that last night was a late night getting results back across the nation and here in Hampton Roads. Brett Hall was on the scene last night covering the Newport News elections and also just keeping up to date with everything going on in the area. So with that, I guess the first question I have is, was anything in the area that surprising last night to you?
Well, so overall, we saw outcomes that were fairly close to what were expected. I think maybe one of the surprises is the outcome in the second district, in the sense that nationally there was not much of a Republican wave, barely a ripple, but it looks like Higgins did manage to beat Luria despite that. Um, so that was a little bit surprising. And overall, what we saw was that the polls were relatively right, which maybe shouldn't be surprising, but I think we all have a little bit of
And
self-talk
here in
about
Hampton Roads, Brett Hall.
and the way those have been wrong in some recent contests.
And Brett, I mean, any observations you were out there where people, they were definitely enthused, but were they excited where you were? Were they surprised with the results, especially as Philip Jones, comes in?
Well, that one was actually decided very quickly. We knew he declared victory just before 9 o'clock. I think some were surprised that the incumbents performed so poorly because he was the only non-incumbent when it comes to city council. He was an appointed planning commissioner in that case. But the argument is also, is the top of the ticket. This is the first time Newport News, Chesapeake, Norfolk, Hampton, the city of Williamsburg ever voted in November for their local elections. And I know that's also been a discussion on, what drove the local elections. Did people come for the top of the ticket and then just randomly hire and fire people down ticket? Jones raised more money than anybody that has ever run for a Norfolk local seat has ever raised, over $200,000, $210,000, and we still haven't gotten the final report yet. He ran TV ads on all four major stations in the market. So he was backed by Terry McAuliffe, who is known for looking for young African American Democrat leading candidates to get behind. So he had momentum. He had one of Terry McAuliffe's campaign staffers working for him. So it wasn't too surprising. It actually stacked up similar to what I thought. I just didn't think the margins would be that big. But he's now brought the average age down for Hampton Roads mayors by a significant amount. I think he's younger decades than the current youngest city mayor. So that's going to change some things up for sure.
Dr. Richmond, do you think it was, the spending dollars on that campaign, or maybe his age, or what do you think got people excited about him?
So I think in a race like this where people don't always pay that much attention to city politics, and especially here you have a really different dynamic in a lot of the local city races where these elections have all been moved now to the November general election. Uh, that sort of awareness of a candidate is going to matter, especially in a context where people can't. It's not going to be just the people who care enough to show up for a May election, as it's been in some places previously. The so the spending helps. I think he ran a good campaign. He brought in uh, talented people to help him, and he put together an effective campaign and was able to overcome. Also, you have, as you mentioned, there's the incumbency advantage. Three people are on city council, but having three of them running probably dilutes that advantage. There isn't the sense of sort of one experienced city council member and then somebody who's new who hasn't been holding elective office. Instead, you have a situation where it's lots of council members who are potentially stepping on each other's toes a little bit in terms of dividing the vote that might have gone to one of them.
Yeah, and I think also to add off that, if I may, it's you had 3 people that had a voting record, and anybody that's looking for change, which the country, I think, up ballot certainly is. So I think anybody, the Republican Party did not endorse in that race because there was no Republican candidate, but they said just vote for non-incumbents, which would only be Jones. And I think non-incumbents is just a strong sentiment in general right now in the country. So I think that probably also helped.
And then, Dr. Richmond, last week we were talking a little bit about incumbency, especially with I was asking if redistricting and sort of what factored in there. But, I mean, was incumbency and redistricting, how did those play hand in hand with, especially the 2nd Congressional, district and other districts around?
Yeah, so incumbency is still an advantage for a candidate, but it's a modest advantage. And in Luria's case, it was further diluted by the removal of the Norfolk precincts, which had been part of her core base of support in the 2nd district. So incumbency isn't worth as much when it's a set of voters that you're just introducing yourself to, as Luria had to for the district swung out through Suffolk and so forth with the redistricting, which it hadn't done before. And so she had to introduce herself to a large number of new voters. New voters are less tied to a candidate. We still saw the incumbency fundraising advantage. She had a lot of extra money compared to Higgins because of the fundraising. If we look nationally, I think we can see at races where incumbency did help candidates pull through. Spanberger race, for example, I think very close, probably that bit of an edge for helped candidates. It's important to remember there the redistricting ended up being favorable for the Democrats. They picked up some additional support with redistricting in direct contrast to what we saw with the 2nd.
I was going to ask you a question, Dr. Richmond, about, we did look, I mean, right now it looks like, and obviously we're waiting for the certification, but it looks like Higgins is going to have a 4% win. Am I on the right mic? Am I good? Okay. I saw you adjusting stuff over there. 4% win in a 6%, 5% district. Does that mean that she won over independent voters? Does that mean there was a turnout, or did that mean Democrats did a good job with turnout yesterday in the 2nd district? What do you see with that?
I think it's, I thought about this a little bit. I think that the overall Luria and Higgins race ended up being more favorable for Higgins than one would probably expect given the district, but not markedly so, only a little bit. It was a district that Higgins had a reasonable chance to win given the demographics of the district, but it was a district that could have gone either way. And so people in the Luria campaign are probably trying to figure out, is there something better we could have done? But at the end of the day, it's the end of the day. Okay, it's the end of the road.
I mean,
I'm sorry.
oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, the thing that I'm remarked about is that in a city of Virginia Beach where Governor Glenn Youngkin won over former Governor Terry McAuliffe with 13,000 votes roughly, you have 550 votes separating Higgins and Luria.
Yeah.
That just...
Luria didn't do badly. She didn't do as well as Biden did in Virginia Beach, but she didn't do as badly as McAuliffe did. And ultimately, she needed a bit more, especially given that Virginia Beach was the core of the continuing aspect of her district, what she hadn't lost through redistricting. She needed to stack up more of a margin there. Their last hope was that there was a big early vote by mail, Virginia Beach total that would put them back in contention. It ended up coming in favorably for them, but it wasn't enough to counterbalance the low performance elsewhere in the district.
I mean, I think it's just a lot of people are saying with the economy, the economy and the president that's in the White House, it was a good performance as is. And I'm hearing a lot of people wondering if the abortion issue is why it was so close in Virginia Beach.
Abortion drove some turnout. There was a lot of second guessing before the election about whether emphasizing abortion was a good idea or a bad idea for the Democratic Party. And one can keep second guessing this, but I think overall it turned out not to be a bad strategic choice. Democrats as a whole overperformed what one would expect to see given the complexion of the election, given the popularity of the president and so forth. And I think that reflects the weakness of the Republican campaign more than anything else, but it may also reflect the resonance of the abortion issue.
That was going to be my next question was, what did people vote for last night? Were they voting for the economy mainly? Maybe they weren't not voting for abortion, but like, were they voting for primarily what they're seeing inflation, what they can see in their grocery stores with their gas bills?
I think what we see in some of the exit polling is that it varied. There were people who were voting for the economy. Mostly they voted for Republicans. There were people who voted on abortion. Mostly they voted for Democrats. And so each party managed to get their messages to a significant extent.
I think the other big question people had is, early voting, that seemed to lean Democratic in the last election. I mean, with this one, did that seem to play a role to either party in this one?
Well, so what we saw, we continued the pattern that we've seen the last several elections, which is that Democrats have been favoring the early and vote by mail especially, and that continued. Virginia Beach was looking like a very, very good night for Higgins until the early vote and the vote by mail came in. And so that pattern of Democrats preferring those modes continued. I think it's getting a little bit more muted, and the volume of the early voting by mail especially seemed to be lower. A lot of the early voting this cycle in Virginia was in that early in-person voting. That seems to be quite a popular option for voters. Overall, we had across the state almost 1 million votes cast through early voting, both vote by mail and in person early. And so a lot of people took advantage of those options. And overall, that was Democrats, but not entirely. There were also a lot of Republicans, especially in the in-person.
Especially in Virginia Beach in the southern, the District 2, the southern area of the city, the place that longtime locals call the county, that had the largest amount of absentee voters, and that's a lot of farmers. That was really interesting to me, and that is where, of course, though, you say it benefited Democrats when those early votes came in. When we go to Virginia Beach City Council and School Board, which is actually on the local level, had the most dramatic changes, in my opinion, in my view. That's where longtime Councilwoman Barbara Henley got the votes to get to her 30% to win, and as well as Kim Melnick for the school board side in that same seat. And that, of course, her winning that seat at that night is what has now caused a split in the ideology of the school board. That's a huge story today. Virginia Beach local race I think is probably the biggest story with this election change, that they're using the federal court system that they were, because the old election system was at a time ruled illegal, violated the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Then that appeal, they were successful on appeal, but there wasn't enough time, according to the city attorney's office, to change it, so they went with it. And now we're going to see a Virginia Beach City Council with 4 African Americans on it, which has never happened before. 2 longtime incumbents, longtime political Virginia Beach people have lost. And to me, that's one of the biggest stories of this election. And we really saw those changes when the early vote was added.
Yeah, the early vote favoring Democrats, favoring when you move from this at-large system, which Virginia Beach had before, right, across the whole city, the African American candidates are not in a position to win majorities necessarily. But once you break it down by district, it becomes, you have areas of the city that have large African American populations, and those are able to get representation in a way they hadn't before. I wonder whether this outcome will become grist for further court fights, right? It sort of illustrates the argument in the case against the previous system. If the city decides to try to go back to it, you can see the consequence of shifting between one system and another for the kind of representation you get.
Yeah, I was saying though, I don't see. I mean, you had 6 people voted in, and then a special election, 7 seats. I don't see where you get 6 votes to try to do another system when half these people just won under this system.
Yep. I agree.
You agree? What else you got for us? Any other burning questions?
Well, my next burning question, and this might take a little bit of more time, and I know that analysis just the morning after is not probably going to give us the full picture of what we want, to have. But how long is it going to take us now? We're just the next morning after Election Day. When are we actually going to see what the House and Senate are actually going to fully shape up to be? I know what they're predicting, but when are you actually going to see that?
I think don't hold your breath at all. Two reasons why we're likely to have to wait a long time. First of all, a number of the states where there's still a lot of seats for the House that we don't know the outcome of. The New York Times projection is Republicans get a narrow majority, but that depends partly on a set of seats in California, for example. Vote by mail, the counting tends to be quite slow in California, and so it's going to take time for that to trickle in. Furthermore, I think in the Senate, it's quite likely that we'll have a Republican pickup in Nevada, which will counterbalance the Democratic pickup in Pennsylvania. And ultimately, what that means is it's going to be decided by Georgia. Georgia, as you may know, has a runoff system. If no candidate gets above 50%, and it looks highly unlikely that either candidate will get 50+% in Georgia, then we're looking at a December runoff for the Georgia Senate race. And so a little revisit of what we saw 2 years ago, where the control of the Senate may well come down again to a runoff in Georgia. And if that's the case, then this issue of control of the Senate is likely not going to be known for about another month.
It's always that it's an interesting rule, and it always seems like there's a vote splitter in there, because I saw the independent candidate in the race down in Georgia had 2%, I believe, is what they were projecting.
Roughly, yeah, roughly 2%. And so you have the 2 major party candidates. It's going back and forth in terms of who's up by a little bit, but ultimately it doesn't matter much because neither of them is particularly close to getting to 50%. And so
I think you probably have a whole country that's upset with that independent candidate. Tired of doing this.
We have to wait for another month to find out.
Tired of doing this. Of course, we're going to have another election here, as VPAP revealed. Well, we knew it was going to happen with State Senator Jen Kagan. She's going to likely resign her seat soon, because I'm sure Governor Glenn Youngkin's going to want a Republican in the Senate by January 11th when the session starts, because the Democrats have that 1 vote advantage already, and I'm sure he doesn't want to give them any more. So that's going to mean more political ads here, right?
Yeah, more political ads here, and maybe we'll luck out and get what we had a few years ago when Northam won as lieutenant governor. Maybe we'll get a whole sequence of things, right? If a member of the state House of Delegates decides that they want to run for the Kagan seat and wins, then we could have one election and then another election just to make it extra fun. We'll see.
I don't know. Anyone that's not a fan of more elections might be looking at their Kiggins vote and be like, "Oh, I didn't know this meant more ads instead of these Christmas ads," but it does.
Yes, potentially. Right at Christmas.
I think, the last question I had, already thought about prior to this conversation is just, I think we're talking a lot this morning about, was it a red wave? Was Trump as successful campaigning, for the candidates, that he was looking for? There was talk this morning that, some of the candidates that, were more independent actually maybe did better, that campaigned away from him.
Well, I mean, the President Trump was never associated with the Kiggins campaign. I don't think I ever heard that word once. We had Mike Pence come to town, which was some found a little ironic considering Kiggins would never answer the question on who rightfully won the 2020 election. But I've never heard he never came to town, rallied, he never endorsed. I remember on primary night when Kiggins won the primary, I asked her, "Would you take Donald Trump's endorsement?" She said, I would consider it. She didn't say yes or say no. And I don't think it really came up any other time. I think people knew with a moderate district, only 6-point Republican edge, with military area that, Virginia Beach went for Biden 9 points. I don't think Trump was ever consideration here.
Yeah, and I think if you look nationally, the picture's still unclear entirely, but it does not look like it was a good night for Trump candidates in close races. We had Trump endorsed candidates underperform in a number of places compared to even what the polling suggested they would do. And so I think this night was about as good an outcome as we could have for the case in the Republican Party that moving on from Trump, if possible, would be a good thing for the party. We saw Ron DeSantis perform very well in Florida, for example, despite Trump's beginning to road test his nicknames for him and so forth in anticipation of a Republican primary fight. We saw Trump-picked candidates in key Senate races stumble, and that may lead to a situation in which Democrats are able to retain control of the Senate. Overall, we had a red ripple in the House. I think Kevin McCarthy is probably going to get to be Speaker, but it's going to be as head of a fractious and extremely narrow Republican majority. So this will be a supreme test of his ability to lead, because it's not going to be at all easy in this context.
Do you predict total gridlock will, I don't want to say continue, because ultimately this Senate and House, this last 117th Congress was it? I'm trying to think, but was semi-successful with some of the big packages they passed. But do you think we're going back to gridlock until the next presidential election?
It's a possibility. Certainly it's going to get harder for Biden to pass legislation if the House is in Republican hands. We'll probably see a lot of messaging bills and that sort of thing out of the House. That said, I think it's important not to underestimate Biden's capacity as a legislator. Biden is the first person we've had as president since LBJ who is a long-time senator, somebody who really knows the legislative process. And we've seen that in terms of his success at pulling out a number of legislative achievements despite the extraordinarily narrow margins Democrats had to work with. I wouldn't count Biden out in terms of his ability to maneuver in the legislative process and find a way to get some achievements.
Well, we have a few minutes left. I don't know if you have any buzzing questions.
Topics? I know
Yeah.
we covered a lot of it.
I know.
What's going to be really interesting, just going back to Virginia Beach, is what happens with the Virginia Beach School Board this morning. Students First, a group founded by school board member Vicki Manning and several others, coming from more, I mean, what would I think could be objectively called a more far-right approach. Some of the school board parents, I guess I'd call them school board parent groupies, because they went to a lot of the meetings during COVID, pushbacks against the COVID-19 protocols, and then continued on with upset about obscene content or what they perceive as obscene content in library books. Some of the teaching in the school, that's where the critical race theory that played big into Governor Youngkin's election came into. And they picked up several seats. I believe they had 3 on the board that were solid. Now they picked up 2 more. And now there's a split on the 11-member board, because there's a member that was initially supported by board member Manning. That was in 2020. And her name is Jennifer Franklin. It was almost escaping my name. But she is proved to be more of a moderate. And some sources I just spoke with this morning said she wasn't treated very well by Manning or board member Laura Hughes over the last 2 years, so she may not be so apt to vote with them. And now Vicky's really going to need her if she wants to say she flipped the school board. It appears the superintendent's job is safe. I know he was successful in getting his contract severance a year and a half now, so around $300,000 if they fired him without cause, because he was worried about what would happen in this election. For his want to make sure he could take care of his family, according to sources I've spoken with. So that's very interesting how the school board crowd that never existed before COVID-19 has really made inroads. I think that is one of the big takeaways. And I've also heard that could have happened in Suffolk too, but I haven't delved into those numbers. I'm sure it's happened elsewhere around the state. I've never seen so much money raised in school board races as I have this year.
The school board and education issues transformed in some important ways during COVID, and we're still seeing that play out. The dissatisfaction of parents with school closures, a number of polls over the last year have given Republicans an edge on the education issue, which is really quite surprising given that this was for a very long time an issue that Democrats were seen as better on. And I think this is part of the story in DeSantis's blowout of Crist in Florida. DeSantis really rode the education issue. Youngkin really rode the education issue. So we see a pattern where, if played artfully, Republicans are able to use this issue of education policy to make substantial gains, especially, I suspect, at the state and local level, which is these are the levels that have the most influence on education policy.
I have to ask you, Dr. Richmond, have you ever been asked by reporters or anybody about school board race analysis in your career before now?
No, this might be a first.
That's just, to me, I'm a nerd about this stuff, but that's just incredible. I mean, I never thought I'd be covering school board. No reporter, in the TV news industry, I know our assistant news director's been here a long time, he's covered school board for the budget each year, and maybe one other controversial topic. Otherwise, TV crews didn't go in there. That's been turned on its head.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really political issue this year, especially as people are, in Virginia at least, Youngkin and everyone is talking about, what they are going to teach in schools, and they had that open forum, talking about school dynamics. So that's a big topic that I think we'll just see increase probably over the next few years here.
Absolutely. It's not, I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Richmond, we don't want to take up too much more of your time, but thank you so much for joining us this morning. I see that we will probably have more political analysis coming in the next few weeks as we see as things shape up here. So really appreciate you being with us this morning.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. If you're watching, Brett, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You're also a very important guest. But thank you so much for joining us this morning. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or on the WAVY.com website.